welcome to everyone. So I was waiting for the time to be 1 o'clock, but it's a bit complicated as it's running really, really fast. Thank you very much for being here. It's an honor to have you on such an important topic as the economics of air pollution. We're gonna have very prominent speakers, but before that, we welcome Shiri Shina from the Clean Air Fund, who is going to tell us what is this great association doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of the Clean Air Fund and Bruegel, I want to extend my warm welcome to all the participants to this meeting, and as well as to Bruegel for hosting this event. Just a quick word about, since you mentioned about Clean Air Fund and what we do. So we were launched about 5 years ago with support and backing from the number of philanthropies. And we have, over a period of time now, become one of the largest philanthropic organizations which works dedicatedly on air pollution and solutions that are needed, having catalyzed over 200 million of funding and for the different movements across the world. We have also, as a result of our last 5 years of work, we have also become a global approach, working across issues of data, health, advocacy, private sector engagement, and presence in 6 country and regional programs. In Europe, we work in UK, in EU, as well as in Poland. In Africa, we are working in Ghana and South Africa. And in Asia, it's currently India, and we're about to add one more country by end of the year in Southeast Asia. And then we have 2 direct delivery projects, which are basically looking at super pollutants, especially around black carbon, and Breathe Cities, which is a very dedicated program on working on solutions in the cities. So in one of the work that we have been doing the last year or so in Europe, and specifically been on the strengthening of the air quality policy, and notably about the Ambient Air Quality Directive with the help of the network of partners that we have in the region, and Bruegel being one of them delivering on that work. So I want to, first of all, congratulate the Commission for the progress that they've made. We're almost there, and also to all our partners who are in the room of the effort that has gone in the stage we have reached on the Ambient Air Quality Directive, and we hope that it will be adopted by end of the year. Just to give few reflections today that, early this week, in fact, day before yesterday, a new report, which is the State of Global Air Quality report, was released by Health Effects Institute, and it now shows very clearly the evidence that air pollution has become the 2nd largest cause of mortality, and it has overcrossed tobacco use as mortality areas. And as you will see from the Bruegel report that we are discussing, the evidence shows that in Europe alone, air pollution is about economic loss of about 600 billion euros, right? And it is regionally disproportionately impacted by different regions, so I think that's the area that we need to look at. We strongly believe within Clean Air Fund that the Ambient Air Quality Directive, which we see is one of the most progressive policies in terms of standards that it is bringing, that it will not only inspire countries in Europe, but also countries across the world, and will be probably inspiring countries to replicate laws which are much more similar to that. And because we are also seeing, in at least the European Union funding going 3x times more over the last 6-7 years into solutions for clean air. We, at CAF, one of the reports that we bring out annually is called State of Air Quality, Global Air Quality Funding Report. We track what is the work essentially happening, and essentially looks at the outdoor air quality programs, and what we know from the publicly available data, that the major source of funding is coming from governments, both national, regional, and local. But the international development funding plays a pivotal role for catalyzing action. So international development funders, obviously, are the multilateral banks, bilateral agencies, and donor governments. They're all supporting various air pollution-related programs in aid recipient countries. And that report also has, the latest one in 2023, has identified a range of financial instruments that can be used to mobilize financing. And we believe that while all of us know that grants play a very critical role in terms of looking at early stage technologies or on infrastructure that is required for research and development, but there are a whole set of financial packages around blended finance instruments that are available, including secondary capital markets, which can actually be used for incentivizing investments in the sector. So I think as we move towards the transposition and implementation of the Ambient Air Quality Directive, it will also be important that the whole range of green products and services would be needed and financing needed for transportation, clean heating, and other solutions that are there. Just to conclude, I think I want to complement the work that the Bruegel team has done to look at the impact assessment on the work on the Ambient Air Quality Directive, but also to look into especially what is the level of financing that is essentially happening within EU. And I think that's a very important source of analysis that supports some of the implementation plan and how these funds will be basically spent at both national level and in the range of countries that is there. So this is a first step. We hope this information that will be presented today will help us to think further and expand further on how we can finance ambient air quality implementation and transposition in coming years. So with that, I hand it over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. So I'll give a very, very like 1 minute or 2 minute introduction for those who wonder what is clean air and why do we care about. So it's going to be very, very fast. Oh, it's going too fast. Worldwide, Girish mentioned already, it's about only PM 2.5, which is fine particulate matter, is causing around 8 million deaths and costing 8 trillion losses, which is 6% of the global GDP. And that was estimated, for example, in 2019 by the World Bank using mortality and statistical value of life. As you can see, Europe is not doing that good. So if we zoom in, we have still 250,000 deaths every year, and we estimated 6 billion losses every year, which accounts for 3% of the GDP, only for one pollutant, which actually gathers many, particulate matter. What is air pollution and where does it come from? So it's a large variety of substances. The most harmful is PM 2.5, so that's why most of the literature focuses on 2.5 as a proxy of all the rest. Air pollution damages the environment, human health, and the economy. We focused on the economy. We think that, in particular, with the new EU composition, the economic argument can be more instrumental than the environmental, unfortunately. Clean air is a public good, like climate. So public good need public provision, otherwise it's always undersupplied. But it has some advantages. It is more localized, it's more visible, not always, and it's more short-lived. So these advantages call for example, unilateral actions that can reap benefits. And last, air pollution comes from all sectors, from residential heating to mobility, energy production, agriculture, and industry. And I will just open the discussion. And despite progress over the last decades, air pollution costs remain immense, and there is increasing evidence to which we add our paper. Okay, so we're going to have a discussion with a very can you leave the slide for a second? Thank you. So we're going to have a discussion in two parts. First, what are the costs, the economic costs, and what is the funding? How is the funding structure to air pollution? And then we will discuss about the future challenges and hurdles that remain. So what can we do given the current situation? So before I give my word, so this is just a chart from our paper, Bruegel paper, that is published today with the support of the CAF, that we thank deeply. That's the cost of air pollution as a share of GDP for Western Europe. We separated Italy, not because you are here, but because it's an outlier for Western Europe. So as you can see, there's a progress from 2007 until 2030's projection. There's a progress everywhere, but Italy, it's an outlier in Western Europe. And then similarly, Poland is a bit of an outlier of Eastern Europe. And at the end, you can see how the EU, in average, we are going from something like 8% GDP cost to somewhere more closest to 3. Okay, so there's progress, but it's still massive. Respect to the funds, so the EU funds were 3 times higher this period compared to the previous period, in particular thanks to the RRF. So that's a main question, is the RRF or a similar tool going to be sustained? Because I think they're very important. The EU funds were allocated, so there's a clear relation between regions that were most hit and regions that are received more funding. But on the other hand, subsidies to fossil fuels are still 5 times higher than EU clean air funds. So when we look at what member states are putting on the table to subsidize coal and diesel, etc., it's still 5 times higher. It used to be 14 times higher. So I don't say, I also, there's a promising avenue there. If we compare the funds that countries receive and you subtract the subsidies across the subsidies that they give to fossil fuels, that's how the picture looks. So there's few countries like maybe Portugal, Spain, or Italy that actually are putting as much in the table as they are giving subsidies. But most countries are clearly giving much more to fossil fuels than putting European money to tackle the issue. Okay, so I'm very happy to welcome our panel. So Rina Badani, senior economist and program leader in the Equitable Growth Finance and Institutions Department of the World Bank. You led and contributed to several bank leading operations, including the Clean Air program for Poland. I would like to first to comment on what is the World Bank, for example, institutional role in addressing clean air or air pollution.
Sure. Thank you. Let me start first with the fact that we've updated our goal, if you want, and mandate, and we've put clean air, air pollution, but more broadly a livable planet as center of our objective. So we've updated ourselves to having a goal of reducing poverty on a livable planet. And it's that livability of planet which is fundamental to the conversation today. We recognize that the role of global public goods, and in particular of situations like air pollution, where you need multiple actors to come together in order to advance on the situation, that we can play a leading role in bringing together the actors, in funding some of the solutions, but also in noting, and in particular I want to talk about this, noting some of the institutional gaps. So without that complementarity of instruments, you will simply not, even if you have sufficient financing, you will not have an efficient use of public finances and not fully impactful. So I put up a couple of slides. Let me see if the clicker works. So I think we have to start with first noting that we have made progress. And so over the past 3 decades, it's really important to note that Europe has already moved on strengthening air quality. Emissions of air pollutants have fallen across Europe, and they've led to air quality improvements. In the period between 2005 and 2020, you've seen the major air pollutants decrease by 10 to 80%. But that progress isn't always meaningful, depending on where you live. So it's very clear that depending on where you live, you're still in hotspots. And your map was beautiful because you can see the outcomes of that in terms of morbidity and mortality. And what's clear also is that these efforts have not only been uneven across countries, but also uneven within countries. And so we still see it being a very much pressing concern. And this is particularly clear when you look at the subnational level. So talking about air pollution at the national level sometimes it's nice as a summary statistic, but it's not meaningful from the perspective of policy impact. So when you look subnationally, of course, you see these concentrations of air pollution. And even when you look at an annual figure, you don't quite pick up the regional variations or the temporal variations. And what I've also come closer to realizing is that when we look at some of these statistics in Europe, particularly at NUTS 3 and NUTS 2 level, you miss some of the aspects that you should be looking at airsheds actually and transboundary pollution, and that we might need to be tackling these with different instruments. So of course the cost is very large, and I appreciate the updated estimates that you have. We have updated analysis from Poland where we're looking at 6.4 to 3.3% of GDP, which is effectively morbidity and job-related productivity losses. But what we're also seeing is that despite the clear cost burden, the fact that the situation is very visible, there's quite a lot of public dialogue, at the local level and at the individual level, the realization of these substantial costs isn't always as clear. And so one of the things that we do, and particularly I'll talk about Poland because this is an area where we work considerably, is we think through the various aspects of transition and investments that are needed institutionally as well as otherwise, to increase the knowledge at the ground level of what is needed, but also to ensure that the national level instruments and the local level instruments are aligned. So what we do is really we see that, okay, we've had substantial wins for air quality, but now what we see in many countries across Europe, and in particular in some of the countries where we work, our program countries in Europe are Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia. We're seeing that the onus now has to be moving from these large emitters where the substantial wins and gains have come towards the small and decentralized entities. These are residential buildings, commercial buildings, drivers, farmers, transport sector. These are just so much harder to regulate and control. So when you look at the picture of what needs to happen, you can, of course, look at financing, which is fundamental, ensuring that all of the actors in the space have the right financing in order to equip the transition. But the institutional and governance arrangements, in fact, come first, because you have to understand the different levels of regulations, have a committed executive, nested planning structures, and you need to ensure that each of these levels of organizational structures, if you want, have the ability, both from a financing perspective as well as from a capabilities perspective and the mandate to properly complete their roles and responsibilities. So we come in from a holistic perspective, thinking of where the biggest challenges are, and in Europe we see that it's moving into the realm of small and decentralized areas. In Poland we're looking at residential heating as the biggest contributor of PM 2.5. Then one has to look at the financing perspective, and we are providing support to Poland with a program for results, which effectively is a financing operation to support some of the transitions that are needed. But without looking at the institutional structures and ensuring that they are aligned to the financing, we recognize that we'll have a gap. And so we try to bring together all of these elements into our operations. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think it's a very, very great perspective that first we need to identify the subnational level and then to work on the institutional aspects before we can think of the funding. Maybe François, I can ask you, what is your perspective from the EU Commission, from the work that you've been doing for the last years in pushing a revision of the AQD and all the work that you've been doing in quantifying the costs and the benefits that can come from air pollution, and in particular the subnational and institutional topic that has been raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really a privilege to be able to benefit from fresh analysis and information on what is an essential element of the debate. But we've done a lot of work indeed, as you've said, Michael, over the past years, in the context of the revision of the AQD that is now reaching the final stage and that we very much hope will be sealed in the, after the summer, in the second half of the year. But when it comes to the costs, what you've highlighted earlier pretty much coincides with the magnitude range that we've worked on at our level. We usually have, in the latest assessments that we had carried out in the context of the revision that have been looked at since, assessed the costs to be around 350 to 850 billion euros per year for the health damage only. And that is something that we then go into specific cost implications, 8 billion for lost working days, for instance, but I won't go through all dimensions of them. We've assessed that for ecosystem damage, for crop losses, for forest damage, for building damage. It's 1 billion euro per year there. So that's the overall sort of cost of air pollution in Europe. But of course, the first cost is the health impact, and that is in itself the main driver of the policy, or at least the most convincing driver that we've been able to use thus far. When it comes to the assessment that we carried out in the context of the revision, the facts are very clearly in favor of action. What we've proposed and put to the co-legislator, which is now being finalized, would result in a cost range in terms of, so cost of action, if you like, of less than 6 billion euro per year. And that would translate into at least 42 billion euros of benefits per year, which can go up to 121 billion per year. So that gives you an order of magnitude that justifies the case for action. There's no question there's a case for action. What is sometimes, of course, difficult is that the benefits of action are not always going to the sectors that bear the cost of action. So you have a discrepancy there that you need to address as part of your policy framework, and the governance element that you mentioned is absolutely crucial, because beyond the funding that is available, the question is whether you'll have the frame that is in place to actually make good use of it and deliver a setting that will allow for progress to be made. But I would like to give you some more numbers, because we've also assessed in our Clean Air Outlook, in the last version of it that was published in 2022. We're working towards the next one that will be out, reasonably soon in the future, after the start of the new commission. What we've assessed is that, again, if we look at the year 2025, based on our baseline scenario, we're looking at roughly 180 billion in terms of costs of air pollution, and something in the range over 77 billion when it comes to the cost of action. So you can really see, once again, the benefits that are derived from acting on air pollution. And the last sort of set of numbers that I would like to give to you relates to the support that is provided at EU level. I mean, you've given that as an illustration, Michael, earlier. If we look at the 2021-2027 period in terms of EU support alone, so that is EU budget plus Next Generation EU, we're in the range of, close to 150 billion for that period, which is 8.3% of the MFF as a whole. So this is significant, but this is not to say that all of clean air action that is linked to the revised Ambient Air Quality Directive is to be funded at EU level. I think that would be a profound misconception to look at the funding support as limited to that envelope. Most of the funding actually comes from the other levels of governance and will continue to come from those other levels of governance. And that is because this is, of course, where most of the budget is available, and also because EU support comes with certain conditions and certain particularities, one of which I would illustrate just to close here, because you've mentioned sort of two outliers there, Italy and Poland. Well, they are in very different situations when it comes to EU setting and EU funding. One, Italy is the biggest beneficiary of Next Generation Europe, so that is a very significant envelope that is at the disposal of Italy and other member states, but certainly that is very suitable for the purpose of what we're discussing here. And Poland faces specific challenges and a level of development that is not comparable to other parts of Western Europe, say, but that is precisely why Poland is actually disproportionately benefiting from EU funding support. So all of this to say that if you go and dig a little bit into the funding tools, you also see that there's a tailor-made approach, but that needs to be reflected across levels of governance. I'll leave it at this for now.
Thank you, François. Thank you, François. So maybe if we are, as we are talking about the subnational and the Italian case, maybe it's the time to hear Raffaele Cattaneo, who was the president of the Lombardy region in the past, and which is one of the regions that, in spite of efforts, the level of air pollution remains high. There are obviously reasons for that, but we wonder what is your point of view and what can be done to improve the situation.
Thank you so much. Thank you to invite me and allow me to be a little bit provocative and to introduce a different point of view. May I have, please, the slide? Yes. Remote control, thank you. I've been, now I am the Undersecretary for International European Relations, but I've been Regional Minister for Environment in the last 5 years, and I've been involved since 1995 in this issue, because I'm around 30 years that in the region with different tasks I work on this issue. What I learned by our experience, I learned that we have to look to the cost of air pollution, but we have to look also to the cost of the policies we need to fight against air pollution. And let me give you a clear example. This is a situation in my region and in the region of the Po Basin, so the region in the north part of Italy, one of the worst area in Europe for air quality. As you can see, in the last 20, 30 years, it depends, for NO2, the chart starts from 1990, from PM2.5 from 2006, but in a large period, you can see that the quality of air is better and better, and the air pollutants have a constant decrease. So what we are asking for now by the new Air Quality Directive of the European Union. We have made, as a region of the Po Basin, a live project financed by the European Commission, so-called PREPARE, that with scientific base have estimated what we need to do to comply with the new directive. And these are the conclusions. You can see the link to the project if you are interested to go in deep. First, even a reduction of 80% of all that pollutants, including PM and NOx emissions, could not lead to achieve the PM 2.5 annual limit of 10 microgram per square meter in the 70% of stations, because 70% of stations still remain above the limit. The same in a reduction of the 80% of the pollutants emission could not lead to achieve the PM10 annual limit, 20 microgram per cubic meter, in the 10% of stations, they remain above the limits, and only reduction between 50 and 80% of NOx could lead to achieve the NO2 annual limit in the new directive. But what concretely does it mean? First, we cannot get that limits with the actual technology. This is the maximum reduction rate that we can get with the technology available at the moment. It means, for instance, all the vehicles, transform all the vehicles, we have around 8 million vehicles in Lombardy, at zero emission. It means to transform all the heating system with the best technology available. In that case, we can get a reduction, you can see it in the bottom line, for NOx of minus 47%, for PM 2.5 minus 50%, PM10 minus 42%. So with the actual level of technology, we in any case cannot get the target that European Union gave to us. But we have also estimated what it means in terms of real feasibility to get the reduction of 80% of all the pollutants. And as I showed before, is not enough, it's still not enough. But considering 80% the best target we need to get something similar to the limits of the new directive, what does it mean in Lombardy? Of course, according to a study of the Environmental Protection Agency of Lombardy, it's not possible with only technical measures, but it also needs a drastic reduction of activities. Which reduction? Removing 75% of vehicles and replacing the remaining 25% of vehicles with zero-emission vehicles. Removing 75% of mixed domestic heating system and 100% of biomass domestic heating system. Removing, plus you must add all the measures. Removing 60% of pigs and cattle and applying the best available technology on the remaining 40%, and removing 75% of industrial activities. You can imagine which could be the impact of these measures on the GDP of our region. We are one of the most developed regions in Europe, and just for example, just for industrial activities, it means to reduce our GDP of 85 billion euro. It is the GDP of the Puglia region, for instance. And it means around 50% of our GDP, also as direct consequence. You can imagine also the indirect consequences of it. Reduced 60% of pigs and cattle means 5% less of GDP, and you can imagine the cost of this kind of measure. So finally, it seems to me that we need to be realistic and to create feasible policies able to guarantee the need of a better clean air, but also the need to preserve an industrial, social, and economic system. because in our region, with the actual limit, it is impossible.
Thank you, Raffaele, for this. We were very happy to have you here, precisely because that's where air pollution remains a problem, and your point of view and your argument are very important. I would ask both Toon and François maybe to react to that. I guess that François has led the proposal of the revision of the AQD. You know that some regions are tougher, have a tougher way than others. So how would you react to that? Obviously, should we do more then? I mean, okay, Raffaele, you're arguing that it's impossible, but maybe you would also argue that action is even more important and more urgent, regardless if you're getting to there or not, but you should do more than in other places given the Po basin situation. And also I would like to have Toon's, so Toon is a senior economist at the OECD who has been working on modeling, to understand what's your point of view, your models at the OECD. I know that you've been working on that. Are they aligned? Do they contradict this very, very dark scenario that you're presenting? So whoever wants to start.
Right. Well, I'll start maybe on 2 points, and indeed directly connected to what you mentioned, Michele, and thank you again to Raffaele for the points that have been made, which we've discussed regularly in other settings. So it's of course not a discussion that we're starting to have now. This is a discussion that we've had for the length of the discussions, and that was a very fruitful dimension of it. One point maybe on the formal setting there, because you did say earlier, the target that the EU gave to us is not realistic, and I just wanted to correct that, because there is a political agreement between the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers of the EU, including all the member states, and Italy is one of the member states that supported that political agreement. So there is an agreement that is shared by the co-legislator. The Commission is not the co-legislator. The Commission supports the process. So at this point, we're not talking about something that was given to member states or to anyone, but something that was agreed by member states, hopefully in their best interest. So that's on this point. But on the substance of the argument, which is indeed an important element, when it comes to feasibility, I mean, first of all, in our initial work in the Commission, when we were holding the pen, we did analyze several scenarios. And those of you, and there are many in the room, who were involved from the outset, know that the scenarios that we looked at included more or less ambitious approaches. In the end, we settled for a middle ambition, if you like, and there are NGO representatives in this room that were not in agreement with us about the fact that we did not go for full alignment with the WHO, for instance. But why did we not do that? Precisely because we looked not just at the health objective, which is the WHO guidelines as provided to us before the revision, but we also looked at socioeconomic impacts precisely, and we looked at feasibility. And feasibility led us to a situation where we have what was proposed by the Commission, because we had assessed that even with what we had proposed, we would have about 6% of the monitoring stations that would not be compliant in 2030, which is the reason why, on top of it, we introduced, and that is for those that are aficionados of the process, that is why we have Article 18, which is about time extensions, which is an article that foresaw in the Commission proposal precisely already to take into account the realities faced by regions such as Lombardy. In the negotiations, the co-legislator decided that this was not sufficient. They maintained the level of ambition on the limit values, but they extended the time extensions based on several conditions. And one of the conditions, which is fully reflecting the Lombardy reality, is one that is based on particular geographical conditions which are such faced by the region, and for which there is a scheme now, which is something that was supported by both co-legislators in the arrival deal, which gives the possibility for significant extension up to a 10-year period. So this is something which, in my view, addresses very much the feasibility points that Raffaele has highlighted, to the point that the member states could consider that to be realistic and not something that would lead to a disproportionate burden. And that is precisely because we are aware of that situation, that we consider that the deal that is on the table is a deal that certainly reflects those realities. But it reflects other realities in Eastern Europe. We can come back to that later, because the Polish situation is quite different, and there it's the issue of domestic heating in a particularly difficult transition condition that needs to be addressed.
Yes, thank you, François. So yes, I believe it's a matter of time. It's also feasibility. It's a matter of time. I think that technology and maybe other policy tools, maybe financial tools, maybe, I don't know, even behavioral tools can operate in the longer term, which maybe they cannot operate in a 3-5 year period for sure. So maybe if we listen to you, Toon, who has been working on the modeling of air pollution, in particular, you've considered maybe solutions for this part of Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Let me first respond to the presentation here, and then I will go into my slides to insert a couple of points based on OECD work into the discussion. And I think when I see the number, I understand why this is shocking for a policymaker. But to me, it looks like an analysis, researchers trying to meet a target, and one way to do it in a modeling assessment is to cut back activity levels. But I think we all agree that is not a workable solution. That's not a realistic and a desirable outcome. So what I think, and what we also find in our assessments, this is a lot more a narrative and a story of transformation, not cutting back, but doing things differently. And that implies that there are also opportunities for other sectors, for other technologies, and for other types of activities. And that implies that it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative story. And as you will see in the next, in the reports I will show in the next couple of slides, we do typically find a positive cost-benefit assessment, albeit at the national levels. So I will highlight a couple of elements from OECD studies. So the OECD has quite already a history of working on the economic consequences of air pollution. This slide builds on a report that was done already in 2016 on the economic consequences of outdoor air pollution, and it makes some of the points that were already voiced by Michael and by François, that the economic consequences of outdoor air pollution, they are a drag on the economy. They can affect workers, healthcare expenditures, crop yields through ozone concentrations. And this translates into a market effect, a GDP effect that can shave off 1 or several % of the GDP. This is a global assessment, so we look at Europe, but we also look at other countries in the world. And we look also at trajectories over time, going up to mid-century and beyond. One striking finding that I found in the report is that in the near term, the macroeconomic impacts of air pollution are larger than those from climate change. Now, that's, of course, new evidence is emerging both on air pollution and on climate change, so it's a difficult comparison, but it highlights that this is an important issue. Climate change has been receiving a lot of public attention, a lot of policy attention, and in my view, it might have been a bit less for air pollution, so I think it's therefore excellent that we are having this event today and discussing this topic. And of course, we also have a different time profile, as already highlighted in the EU. Air quality is improving and the costs are decreasing, while for climate change we have an increasing trajectory over time, and so they have different dynamics. Now, more recently, OECD evidence has also looked at, did a backward-looking analysis and saw that actually the impacts of air pollution on GDP might be quite a bit larger than was initially thought. And this report from 2019, it finds that for each 1 microgram of PM2.5 concentration, we lose 0.8% of GDP in the same year. And that's a lot bigger than what was initially thought. This evidence is now also feeding into the impact assessments from which François was highlighting numbers earlier for the Ambient Air Quality Directive. And this tips the cost-benefit analysis, which was already positive, it makes it even much more positive when we start taking account this kind of effect. This report itself is not so clear on what are exactly the channels, but there is a lot of evidence emerging, also from academia, and it shows the impact on workers. Might be subtle, but it's applicable to a really broad range of workers in different sectors, indoor, outdoor, from a whole range of activities, and that might be one of the key channels that is causing economic damages. Now, in terms of the solutions, one of the aspects that was already highlighted here relate to multi-level governance. We see a lot of local initiatives emerging. They are important, but they are not more effective if they are embedded in larger national or supranational cooperation. And a few years ago, we did a study that really brings home this point by looking at the Arctic countries, the Arctic Council countries, who have committed to reducing black carbon by 2025. We looked at scenarios gradually increasing this group of cooperation, starting with Arctic Council countries, then broadening it to the observers also, and then to the worldwide level. And we see that the benefits increase when we increase the size of this coalition, and this really highlights that cooperation, international cooperation, is really effective. It also assesses embedding clean air policies in a broader transition towards sustainable development, and that highlights the aspect that there are synergies across different domains, and that's also what this slide is about. We did an assessment of the climate, the air quality co-benefits of climate action at the global level, and climate change and clean air have a lot of the same drivers, the same sectors that Michael already highlighted in the beginning. So if you do ambitious climate policies, automatically you get benefits in terms of clean air, and these can be substantial. We quantified these in a study of a few years ago, and we quantified that these co-benefits can offset even the costs of climate policy. So without taking into account the benefits in terms of avoided climate damages. And this is important because it gives a local incentive for global action and a very strong incentive as it relates to local health and local economic benefits. More generally, it doesn't only play out in terms of clean air and climate, but also when we think of pollution, nitrogen pollution and biodiversity loss, there are a lot of synergies across these domains, and when we combine all these targets, we can have more effective integrated policies than when looking at these things in isolation. These were the main points I wanted to insert into discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for these very, very clear points that you've made. I'd like to step to the second part with the time we have, which is, okay, so how can we implement very ambitious air quality directives with the difficulties that there are at some national levels, with the political resistances that might be, with the climate co-benefits or let's say intertwined. So what do you think there is the way forward? For example, I would like to ask you, Rina, your experience in Poland. Poland was lagging behind, and the amount of money that is being put to replace heat pumps, in particular coal-using devices, it's immense and will probably lead Polish cities to an improvement.
Oh, yeah. I've got it. I'm used to the microphone. It's a big probably. If I could ask for my slides back, because I want to put a figure up there. There we go. Ooh, okay. So as Francois mentioned, we have decentralized heat source transition that really has to take a great momentum in Poland. You have about 3 million households, maybe 4, that need to move their heat sources from really inefficient fossil fuel boilers to perhaps heat pumps. They could be biomass. We could look at a range of technologies that need to be implemented. And the tricky part of this is, of course, that you have fully decentralized across the country in every municipality across Poland. There are nearly 2,500 municipalities across Poland. So coordinating all those actors, bringing them together, effectively, it's not a minor task. And so what Poland has done, it's put together a national level framework, if you want, with national level grants and subsidies that are supporting households in this transition, along with a tax relief that allows for this to happen. So that's the financial support to households. But in order to get there, these are the maps that we've done of all of the different stakeholders that need to come together in order to bring this transition to fruition. This was with Polish smog alarm. And you have those that effectively interact with the national level actor that's supporting the program. This is NFOS, the National Fund for Environmental Protection. You have those that are acting with potential beneficiaries, and those that are on the right. You have those that are the businesses, the supply side actors, because when you start this transition, the supply side actors are not ready. The heat pump installers did not have demand. How do you scale up a transition to support 3-4 million households in a 10-year period?
Yeah, so this goes back to Raffaele's argument that you need time. The transition has to be made, but maybe we need time to scale up the technologies that are necessary to do it.
You need a holistic perspective, you need a time frame, you need a plan, you have to think through how each of these actors is going to be supporting your transition, and you need the incentives. And you mentioned fossil fuel subsidies. Those incentives are not aligned to this. And so you need to figure out where your incentive structures are not aligned and to tackle them. And you can't just take it from the perspective of the aggregate cost and the aggregate impacts. You have to look at the individual and think, what are their incentives to move quicker, and work with that. And so it is complicated, but what we see in Poland is that the demand has absolutely taken off. So you see 890,000 applications, I think, now for the Clean Air program, compared to with application rates coming at 4,000 or 5,000 every week now. So the transition is taking off, but it will require continuous support. And what is missing still is some of the institutional aspects. So there are roles and responsibilities that are clearly defined. They are not fully financed. They are not fully functional because there are technical capacities missing at the local government. Municipal plans are there, but they don't necessarily bring up into the regional plans and the national. You don't always have the incentives to enforce and control, and it's very politically costly in some instances when you're controlling your citizens. The local mayors effectively are having to look at their citizens and go into homes, do the controls. They don't always have the finances to do it, and they don't always have the incentives to put in place monetary controls. So you need the entire system to be aligned in order for it to occur. Thanks.
Thank you, Rina. So yeah, it's very inspiring. I think that what is being done in Poland is very inspiring, should be inspiring for all Eastern European countries and also for Italy. I think that maybe you have some comment.
Yes, of course, and I need to...
For example, electric cars in Italy are really lagging behind. So it's definitely, there is a particular topographic situation, but there are some things that need to be done that are not being done as fast as other countries.
Yes, but we have done scientific investigation during the COVID pandemic period. All the private transport, as you know, have been stopped, and the air quality in Lombardy and in the northern Italian region remains under the level, and more or less at the level of normal condition. So we have understood that it's really a complex issue. And I'm completely aware on the consequences on health, on the needs to intervene to reduce air quality. We had a round table involving the stakeholders in 1998 on this issue in my region. We had a regional plan, the first in 2002, then more in the year. But let me go a little bit in deep. Look into this slide. Which are the policies where we as public institutions, as politicians, can really act? In my opinion, are the policies able to reduce the emission, because we cannot cut the mountain. We cannot change the meteoclimatic condition. We cannot increase the wind speed. We can just reduce the emission. These are the level of per capita emission in Lombardy, in green, in Italy, the average in EU, and in other countries.
Lombardy is one of the most densely populated areas in Europe.
Yes,
exactly.
Of course, but so if you look to our emission, we are 1/3 of the average of the European Union for PM10 and less than half of the Italian average emission. And if you look, we are lower the level of any kind of pollutants. So we have already intervened to reduce the emission. And we are going, of course, up in these policies. But there is a level under what is very difficult to go. Second, let me just conclude. This is a chart on life expectancies. I completely aware of the consequences of health, but healthcare, it's a mix of different aspects. We are the more polluted area in Europe. But if you look to expectancies of life, we are the area with the best expectancies of life in Europe. So it does not mean, of course, that air pollution is a good thing for life expectancies. But it means that we need to maintain an equilibrium among different aspects. If you affect all the economic and social system, probably we have an impact also on health. If we reduce the heating system in houses, we will have more problem during the winter for senior citizens and so on. And the last, this is the real reason why our situation is so bad. This is the wind velocity in the Po Valley. As you can see, with this level, this kind of level of wind velocity is just one of the structural aspects we have to tackle. We are not in condition to get the target that the European institution, not you, but all the European institutions gave us. If we were in any place, not just on the windy coast of the Atlantic, but in Germany, we will got 15 years ago the actual limits, we will be able easily to get the limits of the new directive. But let me ask for a place-based policy, as the European Union normally said, but in this case simply do not apply. We need a place-based policy able to take in the right consideration the differences among the territories and the possibilities to concretely intervene on some policies and the impossibility to intervene on some structural aspects which not depends by ours.
Thank you, Rafael. François, if you want to react to that and also to Polish case or Eastern countries, you said that it's very different. So they,
Yeah, well, shortly on the elements now, on the sort of the need for a differentiated policy, and earlier I mentioned Article 18, that is precisely a differentiated policy because depending on where you are, you will have the possibility or not to have time extensions, and those are determined by the conditions that you face. And in the case of Lombardy, the specific conditions on wind velocity, for instance, are obviously going to be a factor that will be reflected in that setting. But where we would disagree in terms of differentiation is that wherever you live in Europe, whether you live in Milan, in Sofia, or indeed in the west of Ireland or in Estonia where the air is very pure, you have the same right to breathe clean air. And this is something that certainly from the Commission's perspective would not be negotiable. We're not in a situation where we could decide that some areas in Europe should actually have dirty air simply because the conditions are more difficult for it to get clean, because it doesn't mean that it's impossible, but for that we already have a differentiation on the time frame. But zooming out of Lombardy and looking at the EU as a whole, you were mentioning Poland earlier, and so was Rina. I mean, when it comes to funding, and I'll zoom further from funding right after, but on funding, it's clear, and your maps showed it, and the map from Thun, the situation in Poland is more dire than it is in other parts of Europe, and that is, well, the legacy of a number of specific developments that have led to that situation, in particular linked to the domestic heating choices that were made in terms of the use of coal. But when it comes to the tools available to Poland, if you look at EU funding through regional policy, for instance, Poland is one of the countries that has the largest amount of funding per capita, and that is justified. And that is also a country that benefits from very low co-financing when it comes to the tools available at EU level. And that is also to reflect a difficult situation, not just from a health perspective, but also from a socio-economic perspective. And so that is reflected in the tools. But I would like to join again Rina when it comes to not looking at funding per se as the silver bullet, because what we know is that the areas where most success is achieved are not necessarily the areas that have benefited from most funding, but those where the governance frame has been most tailored to deliver results. And that includes, in the first place, consistency of action through the local, regional, to national level, and indeed the EU level, but also across administrations horizontally, that you don't have a Department of Transport that does the opposite of what the Department of Environment wants to do. And these elements are far more significant in terms of successes made than whether one got more or less funding, which is not at all to diminish the importance of funding. There is a need for funding, and that is why we're catering for it. But funding is no panacea to solve the clean air issue if the governance frame that supports it is deficient. And in this regard, I would also want to underline that we often face discussions about the need for more funding, but if we look at the previous funding period, the previous MFF as we call it, well, there was more funding available for clean air than was actually used by the authorities that could have claimed it, because we have a system that is quite decentralized in terms of prioritization. And that takes us back to the issue of governance, because if you decide to not prioritize clean air, you make a political choice, and you may make it for good reasons because you have other priorities. But this shows that you need to look at it in the entirety of how you frame your priorities for this to be a successful strategy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, and there's time has come for the Q&A. So if we have a few questions from online, but if you have some questions from the audience, we'll be very happy. Yeah, I don't know.
Good afternoon, Sophie Pirois-Kerman from the Health and Environment Alliance. Thank you for this, entertaining dystopian discussion. And I would like actually to take us back to reality, because I'm very, very, very shocked by what I heard. So just coming back to facts, the situation where we are at, the air pollution may look like it is decreasing, but that's temporarily, because climate change is increasing pollution. And we cannot escape this fact. So the urgency, it has never been so big to act on health. And this is, sorry to say, there is no contradiction between health and economy. So please, can we come back to reality? This is really, really shocking what I heard. So really, when you talk about health, children that are exposed, in utero even, they have development issues if moms breathe polluted air. This is very long-term issues. So this is very important to say. So please, can we just come back to this? Because this is a dangerous way of just letting things being said when we think, oh, let's maybe regulate wind. No, we're not going to regulate wind. We're going to not create any inequalities, because we already have inequalities. So please, can we just come back to how we tackle inequalities? And there is no reason why people in any region would have less rights. We are in the European Union. Please, can we just make sure that we respect these fundamental elements of the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can gather more questions. Thank you, Sophie. I mean, we focused on the economics, not to say that the health impact and the environmental impact are huge, and that we are trying to see that even only on the economic aspects, they are immense. But obviously we are not. I think none of us here is undermining or under-considering the health impact. Yeah, maybe here, and then Margarita.
I just wanted to make one point. Maybe I will make 2 points, because I would like to refer to what Mr. Cataneo said. I agree with you that meteorological conditions matter. I come from Kraków, from Poland, where meteorological conditions are equally bad to Po Valley. And I am aware that these places, these authorities, need to do much more. In Kraków, when we started the campaign for clean air 12 years ago, we had 140 smoggy days, heavy smoggy days per year. Now it's less than 30. So it was worth this. And what is really, really important, that all the people, regardless whether they live in Po Valley, in Kraków, they deserve the same clean air. So it's really, really important. And it is why I really particularly like the recommendation of the report that says that particular attention should be put to the places like northern Italy, Poland, that have much worse situation. So it is really important that this attention should be on the places which are more affected. But the second point, which was originally my only point, was about money. We can spend billions of the EU money, domestic money, on air quality improvement. But when this is not assisted with other clean air policies, the effect will be very limited. And just very quick example from Poland. In Poland, we have 25 billion program to encourage people to replace the coal boilers to other clean air, clean sources. And right now we are risking that after spending like billions of euro, the effect of this policy will be very limited because regulations are either not in place or they are not enforced. So after spending several billions euro, we observe that people who replace coal boilers a few years ago using public subsidies right now, because coal prices are very, very low, are coming back to coal heating. And after several years, we'll think what to do again. So it is effective. When we talk about effective and efficient clean air policies, we need to think about money and proper regulations and other policies in place. It's really, really important because without proper regulations, we cannot have effective and efficient spending of public money.
Thank you. Thank you for these points. Vanessa? And then we will react to this.
Thank you. It's working? Yeah. I'm Vanessa Lopez from Salud por Derecho, an advocacy NGO working on the right to health in Spain. Thank you, Bruegel, for this event. I'm looking forward to analyze, to see the impact on health from the economics point of view. Related to your comments, Raffaello, I think we should have into account a better input or data to analyze the needs of this directive is the numbers of premature deaths that you can have in your region, and of course the morbidity rates. And also I think fortunately we are in the final part of the process of the directive, and is going to be approved in the coming months. So I think it's time in order to resist this directive and the regulation, I think for regions, difficult regions like yours, thinking of asking to the European Union, for instance, and other institutions help to incorporate and to implement the plans in order, to avoid all this impact on health, and instead of resisting and saying that it's impossible to achieve the limits. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan and Margarita, and then Juan, and then we have two more questions from online.
Thanks a lot, Margarita Tolotto from the EEB.
Not working yet. Yes.
Sorry, Margarita Tolotto from the EEB. Thanks for this very insightful conversation. My question is for Mr. Cattaneo. Actually, we know Italy has been found guilty by the Court of Justice for having breached the PM10 targets from 2005 to 2017. To what extent do you think this situation and the past one is actually related and due to the delay in action by the responsible administrations in the Po Valley regions? What is your role in this, actually? Thanks.
And Juan, and then we will react. Your points are very clear, so I think that we will recall them very.
So thank you for the presentation. I'm Juan, a research assistant here at Bruegel. So one question for Mr. Buckenhout. Basically, how would the Commission, European institutions, would enforce the application of, for instance, the exceptions in these articles? So how can we avoid that more regions we want to be the Po Valley, and they have that reason? Another question for Thun. So can we, because we want to approach reality, and the best way probably is providing numbers, how can we make more accurate estimations of the cost of pollution? For instance, probably it's reasonable that the benefits in Poland to reduce 1 milligram of PM2.5 are higher than in Finland, that they're already complying with the WHO levels. And basically, and finally, a comment in one of the slides that Mr. Cattaneo showed. So I don't think it's fair to show the pollution per capita, basically because if here we have 50 milligrams of PM2.5, we all have 50 milligrams. It's not like if we are 50 people, we don't have 1 milligram each, right? We are all affected by that pollution. So I would recommend to change that approach.
Okay, thank you. So I'll add two more. There are three more questions to Raffaele Cattaneo. So if the Po Valley, so I think that the health aspects are very important. That northern Italy, Poland, and other regions in Europe deserve more care rather than the opposite, because they are more difficult to reach. So one of the two more questions from people online is why in Italy, for example, the Lombardy region was against the surcharging the SUVs. Why there are not more cycling lanes in the Po Valley, which is rather flat, and why did they oppose to other measures on farms and cattling, which would reduce emissions? So why, if it's more difficult as a place, why things are being done even less? And I don't know, if you want to react, François or Rina, Raffaele, you've many questions addressed to you.
I have too many questions, but I can start very briefly. On the last question, cycling lanes are diffused also in our region, my region, in our region, the Po Valley. You can see our regional plan for cycling lanes on our website. So it is not true. Probably is it true that it's true that our citizens are less used to take bicycle instead than cars. Looking, for instance, area like Belgium or Netherlands, there is a culture in favor of the use of bicycle more diffused than in our region. We have to implement it, and we are doing something on it. We are not against, well, I'm not member of the League, I'm member of another party, member of the EPP, so, but League is not against the surcharge. We have an heavy surcharge for powerful cars in Italy, and League is against an upper surcharge, but we have already a very heavy surcharge. So,
but maybe François commented that, okay, now you think that you don't have time to comply to the EU new limits, but 10 years ago, maybe you did not do enough to be today in a position that would allow you to comply. For example, we said that the Europeans didn't have the culture for masks when COVID came. And when it was necessary, we did it. It was something that in Asia, it was more common. Now, I mean, yeah, Italians don't have the culture to bikes like Spanish neither, but maybe we should foster these things that work.
Which is the way, because this is the political most important point. We have to oblige our citizens, or we have to give them the tools for a free choice of better behaviors. In my opinion, if we decide to give them just obligations
but how can you cycle if there are no cycling lines? So some part of the incentives.
I invite you to come to Lombardy and we show you how many cycle lines we have. Very nice in beautiful places. Also, not just on the plain, but we have a lot of hills and mountains in Lombardy. It's not so easy to go on bike, but by bike. But we agree that we need more cycle lanes. We need more zero-emission vehicles. But in our opinion, we have to give the citizens the tools and the incentives when they need it to choose on freedom base the better behavior.
What about
this is the most important point, because
Raffaele, what about giving the incentives to the regions and to the local to the mayors, not only to the citizens but also to the governments who are choosing the measures, so that the citizens can have a better access?
Also on it, I'm interesting. You can do, for instance, an interesting investigation comparing the environmental policies to tackle air pollution in some regions in Europe. We are sure that what we have done in the last 25, 30 years have probably no comparison in our regions in Europe, but we are ready to take the challenge to show what we have done in the last 25 years and to compare it on what has done in other regions in Europe. It seems to me we have done a lot of things, and the per capita emission is an example on it. I don't agree with
Rafael,
that.
let me also, because we are running very, very short
Yeah,
of
yeah,
time,
I'm
so
sorry.
if Rina, you want to react, or Francois, Toon, I don't know.
I just want to thank the colleague who gave a first intervention. I wouldn't call the discussion dystopian in all its aspects, but I do think your point that this is a hugely important issue for Europe is well taken. That clearly the costs, as Francois mentioned, of poor air quality are, in our estimates as well, outweighing the costs of tackling the issue. My interventions focus on the tackling of it because it is tricky with all of these decentralized sources that we're looking at, with some of the trade-offs that have to be made. That transition is not straightforward, and I really appreciated the perspective of the need to combine financing with the regulatory instruments that drive the market, because just having the carrot there of the financial support in the transition will not be sufficient. It won't happen at a fast enough pace. And so you need the regulation to come from behind to match that, and the enforcement and controls that then bring it, alongside the plans that are then implemented into actions, because a plan without a structure and a strategy is just a wish. Thanks.
Francois?
Just shortly, because there was a question from Juan about how we would look at enforcement. Well, the answer I would give you is to look at the way we've enforced the legislation as it stands, which is something that has been done extremely determinedly. I will not give you the number of infringements that we've launched and successfully won. There are several that have been highlighted. Of course, it's never a pleasure to launch an infringement because it's a recognition that something has not worked, and we always prefer things to work. But when they do not work, we do have that tool as a tool that can indeed ensure that we get the results that are required. And we've never hesitated to use that tool in support of our citizens. So we will enforce the legislation to come with the same resolve as the legislation that is currently in place.
Toon?
Yeah, I'd like to come back to a few points, applying the holistic perspective to the case of Krakow and also in Lombardy. If we can bring up my slides, and I will also illustrate some of the points.
Let's try.
If we can.
Ilgas, you still there?
So one point is on the regulation.
First part or second part?
This will be fine.
Okay,
thank you. Other regulation needs to be in place, and this needs to be an integrated policy package. Otherwise, you are spending subsidies or you are spending public resources in an ineffective way. And one example of this is that there is a lot of fossil fuel support still available in countries, and this is actually, it has increased, as Michael also has shown. Here the OECD data shows the same message. And the same holds for the energy prices. So we still see very differentiated energy prices across users, across sectors, and across fuels, and across countries, even in the EU. And this translates into ineffective policies. And the European Commission has actually proposed, as part of the Fit for 55 package, a revision of the Energy Taxation Directive, which sets minimum levels for taxation on energy products. And that proposal included, it started from the current situation, which is very diverse, which you see here on the chart, a ranking of all energy uses across fuels, sectors, and countries. There was a proposal to fill some of these gaps, to add a climate component, and to add an air pollution component, which also raises taxation for coal use and also for bioenergy use. Without these price signals in place, other instruments might be less effective. And then finally, for the holistic perspective, I think what is useful to mention from the slide on the emissions from Lombardy is that the one you didn't mention is the one for ammonia emissions, which was much higher per capita than compared to other countries. And that indicates a strong potential also to reduce emissions. If you reduce ammonia emissions, you reduce PM2.5 emissions. And we did a study, so this is not a policy assessment. This is a free thinking in the sense that we study dietary shifts across the globe, and we look at flexitarian, vegetarian, or vegan diets, and we see that already a flexitarian or vegan diet, it has huge potential to reduce air pollution and associated health and economic costs. And what is interesting is that in this map, which shows the reductions in PM2.5 for vegetarian diets in 2030, you see strong reductions also in the north of Italy, and that indicates that there is a potential to do something. And the question is how to do it. That also relates to the pricing. As soon as you introduce pricing, there will be equity impacts. Here in the EU, you can work on the demand side, you can try to influence diets, but there is international trade, so meat and other products can be exported, so you might also want to work on the supply side, on agriculture. But we have seen in recent discussions and with recent protests how difficult that may be, and the political challenges involved. So I think that's one to keep in mind for the future.
So thank you very much. I think that we have to wrap up. So thank you, François, Raffaele, for coming. Toon, Rina, thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. I think that air pollution raises a lot of urgent questions that need to be addressed. There is the supply side that can be addressed. I think that the demand side is also an important tool. There's also the supply, the regulation, and other incentives tools. What is clear from this discussion is that Europe is making progress, but not enough and not everywhere. That we have the regulation that will accompany an improvement of air pollution, but it needs to be accompanied with coherence, with institutional ties, which to make it work. Otherwise, it can happen like in places like in Poland, where subsidies alone, you can backlash if they are not supported by enough in the future. So thank you very much. The discussion at Bruegel and obviously in the Commission and everywhere, all the people that are here, we will continue the discussion and try to think and propose things on this topic. So thank you very much, and feel free to, yeah. Thank you.